Good morning, and welcome to the Pillbox. I am not a scientist, but for a long, long time, I've had a very fascination in climate and weather. I've, yeah, it was basically first sparked when literally a scientist who I used to get things for him, like because he couldn't mix in those circles. Um, Came round to my house in about 1985, 86, I think it was, and sat in the corner looking really, really depressed and told me that if we don't get things sorted within 5 years, we're doomed because of global warming. And that sort of like triggered into my sort of like sensitive about global warming and everything like that. And I took him at his face value because he was a scientist and I wasn't. Anyway, 5 years came and went and nothing really happened. And so I started researching it. And it came out that from my own personal research that the only thing that actually governs the temperature on Earth is the sun. That is where all power comes from on the Earth, all the life and all the life force and everything like that. It comes from the sun. And there is hot down underneath us and everything like that, but that's even affected all the earthquakes and things like that, and the volcanoes are even affected by the sun. It's amazing when they do the research. And all the 16-year-old girls screaming, "How dare you!" in the world cannot change the fact that CO2 doesn't have any real bearing on the temperature on Earth. It's only the sun. And currently, the sun goes in cycles, you see, because it goes into sort of 12-year cycles, so you have a minimum and a maximum in the 12-year cycles, and it goes up like that, like almost like a sine curve. And at the top of the curve, the sun has got more sunspots, and it's more active, and therefore it's hotter. And at the bottom of the curve, it has less sunspots, so it's least active, and it's cooler. Now, these sort of like cycles in 12 years are not all the same. Sometimes the lowest part of the cycle is above the highest part of the cycle in other cycles. And that sort of term runs for hundreds of years between different sort of like magnitudes. And basically, we've just come through one of the highest magnitudes of sunspot activity in thousands of years. From about middle of the 19th century, middle part of the 19th century to the end of the 20th century, that was one of the most active periods that the sun has been, and it's been warmest, and hence the climate warmed throughout the whole of the world, as it would. Now we've come to the end of that cycle. And even NASA are sort of predicting this now. They're saying like we're coming out of that cycle and we're going into a cooling period, where sort of like it's called a grand solar minimum, right? Because the sun's still sort of like going hot and cold every 12 years, but instead of going like that or like that up there, it's doing it down here because it's cooler all over. And we're basically at the start of a new cycle, so it should be building up to more sunspot activity, and so the sun should be warming up over the next 12 years. Warm up 5-6 years up to the top, then cool down again. But they're predicting the top bit of it is going to be minimal. It's not going to be big, so it's called a grand solar minimum. And that means there's less heat being delivered to the Earth from the sun on a day-to-day basis, second-by-second basis. So over a period of time, the Earth cools down. And one of the things like where we are in Britain, in the Northern Hemisphere, we have the jet stream. We have a jet stream in the Northern Hemisphere and a jet stream in the Southern Hemisphere. And when the planet is warm, the jet stream is really, really tight round the top, and it runs round the top, and it's really fast, and it goes round, like spins round the top of the, round over the poles, sort of like just not too far down, just by Greenland, over the poles. And that's where Britain gets its sort of westerlies from, and because it's driving all the thing in it, so the warm and the wet weather that comes into Britain is driven by the a tight jet stream. But when when the sun goes into a grand solar minimum, that jet stream hasn't got the sun actually drives that jet stream by the heat. As it cools down a bit, the jet stream gets lazy and it drifts south and it sort of waves about. Mary Docketal, I can't even pronounce it, but I mean that's what it's called, and that's what the jet stream's doing now, and hence this is we're bank holiday weekend in August, and it's doing that round us at the moment. So we've got cold Arctic air coming down over the country. Now this that's why we're going to have a record cold for August bank holiday. I mean, this morning it was probably about 7 degrees this morning on my thermometer when I got up, which is very cold for southwest England. And the 30th of August. So basically, even NASA predict that this cycle is probably going to last at least 50 years. So it's sort of like prepare for cold. All the global warming, absolute rubbish, was exactly that. It was complete rubbish. It was just a natural cycle. It's got CO2 is plant food. CO2 is the food of life. And if the CO2 level drops beneath a certain level, and we got quite close to it actually towards the end of the 19th century, if the CO2 level drops below a certain level, then all life will cease on Earth. So we need CO2 for life. And if you look at that, there was a volcano went off in the Philippines a few months ago, and it put more CO2 into the atmosphere than we've managed in something like 100 years, and it did it in a couple of days. So you can see the amount of effect of CO2 that we're having in comparison to the whole thing. And that's one of the things in the grand solar minimum that tends to happen. Volcanoes and earthquakes become more prevalent. And we're waiting to see that. I mean, this is only what I've read. So it will be quite interesting. So, whether we're going to get a cold winter or not because of the grand solar minimum, I don't know. Because last year, the wavy jet stream went up and round Britain virtually all the way through the winter, and we got a completely lovely mild winter, and it could happen again. But it could happen. We could have a mild. Just because it's a grand solar minimum doesn't mean to say you're going to get pockets of warm air around Earth in places where it should be cooler, but you also get pockets of cold in places where it should be hotter. So there's no. I mean, this is a wonderful thing about climate weather. It's very, very difficult to predict, and people do find it very, very, very difficult to predict. And honest meteorologists do say that. Now, I've stopped going to the Met Office now for my weather forecast because I went for the long-term weather forecast for the winter, and there's still political activists really talking about, oh, we're going to have a mild winter in Britain because of global warming, and they're still pushing that agenda, which is political activism. It's got nothing to do with climate prediction. And if I'm going to put some things up in here from Electroverse. It's a sort of independent meteorological sort of like thing about weather, and it's about the grand solar minimum. And if you go over to electroverse.net, you can actually find stories about what is happening in regards to cold and hot on the planet. And I think it's nearer the truth than what you get when you get anybody that's driven by a political agenda. Because global warming is a political agenda. It is a cultural Marxist political agenda, because they want to do anything. The cultural Marxists are trying to take over the planet because what they want to do is destroy sort of capitalism. And the way they can do it is say, oh, you can't drive your cars, you can't do this, you can't do that because of you're causing the planet to die by doing that. Well, you're not. Trust me, you're not. This has been 10 minutes. This has been the longest video I've made in ages. I'm going to remove some of the older videos of mine because I've been ill recently, and I think I made Joe Biden look like quite a sharp wit. Yeah, creepy Joe. Anyway, stay thing. Do have a look at the Grand Solar Minimum, people, and if you want to like and subscribe, you're more than welcome to. I'll see you on the other side. Cheers.